In the 18th century, a storm was brewing across the Atlantic. The British Empire ruled over 13 American colonies, but beneath the calm surface, whispers of freedom began to rise. Taxes without representation, control without consent. And soon, those whispers would turn into the roar of revolution. This is the story of how farmers, blacksmiths, and scholars rose against the mightiest empire on earth and gave birth to a new nation, the United States of America. Opening shot, dark clouds rolling over the Atlantic Ocean. Fade in. Old map showing the 13 colonies glowing one by one. Show colonial streets, people at markets, soldiers marching. Dramatic music builds up. Slow, orchestral, heroic tone. The spark began with the Stamp Act and the tea tax. The British demanded heavy taxes, but gave the colonies no voice in Parliament. Across taverns and streets, one slogan echoed again and again. No taxation without representation. Tensions boiled over in 1770 when British soldiers opened fire on unarmed citizens in Boston. It became known as the Boston Massacre. 5 men were killed that day, but their sacrifice ignited the flame of rebellion. Then came the Boston Tea Party. Patriots disguised as Native Americans boarded British ships and dumped chests of tea into the harbor. It was a message loud and clear. We will no longer be slaves to a distant king. Colonies show old British tax stamps and coins falling on a table. Cut to angry crowds shouting, "No taxation without representation." Recreate the Boston Massacre with slow-motion shots of gunfire and smoke. Transition to night. Ships in the harbor, men throwing tea into the water. Background sound. Stormy wind plus angry crowd plus dramatic drums. April 1775. At Lexington and Concord, the first shots were fired. No one knew who pulled the trigger first, but those gunshots echoed through the pages of history. It was called "The Shot Heard Round the World." The American Revolution had begun. George Washington, a tall, determined man from Virginia, was chosen to lead the Continental Army. His soldiers were poorly trained, poorly armed, but they carried a weapon far greater than muskets: the unbreakable spirit of freedom. Through bitter cold at Valley Forge, through bloody battles like Bunker Hill, they fought not for gold or glory, but for the right to be free. The British had power, discipline, and fleets. The Americans had courage, hope, and faith. Colon battlefield at dawn. Smoke, soldiers aiming muskets, chaos. Title text appears. The American Revolution begins 1775. Show George Washington taking command, close-up of his face. Soldiers marching in the snow at Valley Forge, tired, hungry, determined. Epic music, slow strings rising to powerful drums. In 1777, at the Battle of Saratoga, the impossible became reality. American forces defeated a major British army. It was a turning point. News of victory reached Europe, and France decided to join the fight. They sent ships, soldiers, and supplies. For the first time, the Americans had true allies. The revolution was no longer a dream. It had become destiny. After years of sacrifice and bloodshed, in 1781, at Yorktown, the final battle was fought. The British Army, led by General Cornwallis, was surrounded, defeated, and forced to surrender. The war was over. The impossible had been achieved. Show maps with battle markers moving across America. Quick cuts of cannons firing, horses running, flags waving, French ships arriving, ocean waves and naval cannons. Yorktown siege, soldiers surrounding British camp. Cornwallis lowering the British flag slowly, fade to silence. 2 years later, in 1783, The Treaty of Paris was signed. The United States of America was officially born. But this victory was not just of weapons. It was a victory of ideas, freedom, equality, and the right to self-rule. From that moment on, the world would never be the same again. Empires would rise and fall, but the spirit of freedom born from that revolution would echo across generations, lighting the path for nations yet to come. This was the American Revolution, the story of how freedom found its voice. Peaceful sunrise over the American flag, soldiers returning home, families embracing. Show the signing of the Treaty of Paris. End with an eagle soaring over mountains and soft background music. Final screen text. Freedom has a price, and they paid it. By 1777, the war had reached a critical stage. The British Army planned to divide the colonies, marching south from Canada. But near a small town called Saratoga, the American forces led by General Horatio Gates and Benedict Arnold stood strong. The British plan failed. The American victory at Saratoga changed everything. It proved that the colonies could win against the empire. After Saratoga, the world took notice. France, the rival of Britain, saw hope in the American cause. In 1778, France officially joined the war, sending ships, soldiers, and supplies. This alliance turned the tide. Now America was no longer fighting alone. It was fighting with the power of Europe behind it. But the fight was far from over. In the winter of 1777 to 78, George Washington's army suffered through the bitter cold at Valley Forge. They had little food, no shoes, and almost no hope. But they did not give up. In 1781, the final and most decisive battle took place at Yorktown, Virginia. With the help of the French Navy blocking the sea and Washington's troops surrounding the British, General Cornwallis had nowhere to run. After weeks of fighting, the British Army surrendered. The war was over. The impossible had become reality. The colonies had defeated the mighty British Empire. In 1783, the Treaty of Paris was signed. Britain officially recognized the independence of the United States of America. A new nation was born, built on courage, freedom, and sacrifice. The American Revolution had not just created a country, it had inspired the world. The story of the American Revolution reminds us that freedom is never given. It is earned through courage, unity, and sacrifice. And sometimes even the smallest voices can shake the largest empires. As the war spread across the colonies, voices of rebellion echoed in every town. Farmers left their fields, blacksmiths turned their hammers into weapons, and mothers prayed for sons who might never return. The dream of liberty was stronger than fear. During long nights by the campfire, soldiers wrote letters home, not knowing if they'd ever be read. One wrote, "Tell my wife I fight so that our children may be free." Their words carried the spirit of a new America. But the British were not done yet. They brought reinforcements from the sea, cannons, redcoats, and warships. The colonies burned, cities fell, but the spirit of resistance refused to die. When France joined the war, the tide began to turn. American ships sailed beside the French Navy, their flags flying together in the wind, a symbol that freedom was no longer a dream. When the war finally ended, silence fell across the land. Battlefields lay empty, but freedom filled the air. From ashes and sacrifice, a nation was born. The American Revolution was not just a war, it was a message to the world. A message that power cannot crush the will of a free people, that even ordinary men and women, united in courage, can change history forever. What to do when the enemy had no king, no capital, and wanted absolutely nothing from Rome. The moment the legions crossed the threshold of Colonia, everything began to go wrong. Colonia was made of rocks and silence, a landscape shaped to slowly destroy any force that dared to caress it. The mountains of the Great Plains rose like natural walls cut by narrow valleys, treacherous swamps, and forests so dense that light barely touched the ground. The Great Caledonian Forest, a mass of ancient vegetation, was impenetrable, dark, and full of invisible traps. The peat bogs swallowed feet, horses, and even entire carts, deep lakes. The locks emerged like black wounds in the landscape and the ground, always damp, slippery, unstable. The rain seemed endless. Thick fogs arose out of nowhere, blocking visibility to within a few meters. The legionnaires marched without knowing if the road ahead was safe or would lead them straight to a precipice. Even in the camps, the humidity was relentless. Rotting provisions, corroding armor, spreading disease. Medical accounts from the time mentioned the increase in dysentery, lung infections, and mysterious fevers among the troops in northern Britannia. Diseases that did not kill in combat, but slowly wore down the morale of any army. Roman strategy developed over centuries depended on order. Calculated marches, symmetrical camps, well-planned roads, constant supply lines. It was a machine, but machines break down when the terrain refuses to cooperate. In Colonia, no road remained intact for long. No convoy could advance without risk. No map was reliable, and every tree, every hill, every bend could hide the next disaster. Visibility was so unstable that scouts got lost, entire patrols disappeared. Archaeological research and climatological studies confirmed that the climate in Scotland during the Roman period was in many ways even harsher than it is today. Long winters, short summers, and constant humidity turned the campaign into a war against the environment itself. The Romans were prepared to face human armies, but in Colonia, their greatest enemy was the ground beneath their feet, followed by the ghosts that slipped through the fog and used nature as their own weapon. They appeared as shadows on the hills, painted bodies, faces hidden by the mist, eyes as alert as those of predators. The Romans called them picti, the painted ones, not because they knew their language or culture, but because they saw their skin marked with blue lines, mystical drawings, tribal symbols, probably made with wad, a local plant with intense coloring. It was the only possible visual record of a people who left no writings and built no cities. The Picts were not a unified nation, but rather dozens of tribes and clans scattered among mountains, valleys, and forests, each with its own leader, culture, and way of surviving in one of the most hostile environments in Europe. The absence of a central government, which the Romans saw as a sign of weakness, was in fact a weapon because there was no single point to conquer. Each tribe was ahead of the OE, like another inevitable success. And then their eyes turned northward. Colonia was seen as just another stage, just a mountainous terrain to overcome, a technical obstacle, not a strategic one. The peoples who lived there were considered primitive, tribal, without writing, without large-scale agriculture, without a central political organization. Rome saw them as savages who had not yet understood the benefits of being conquered. Called Julius Auricula, governor of Britain and father-in-law of the historian Tacitus, was one of the first to lead campaigns to the north. In his biography written by Tacitus, we clearly see the Roman mentality. The Caledonians were described as tough brutes, yes, but backward, and therefore inevitably surmountable. Rome believed that time and force would be enough to bring them to their senses, but that confidence hit a fatal blindness, because Rome knew how to deal with enemy armies. It knew how to negotiate with local elites. It knew how to subdue cities and cut off supplies, but it did not know. Like, subscribe to the video.